It may not be fair what you're going through.
But Dr. Tony Evans says that no matter what, the Lord has the power to set it all straight.
If you stick with God, He can take a mess and whip up a miracle.
This is The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, author, speaker, senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and president of the Urban Alternative. In most areas of life that matter, we can't lose control because we never really had it in the first place. Dr. Evans says that's because God is sovereign. What does that mean? We'll find out as he takes us to Malachi chapter 4 for today's lesson.
Malachi's concern is taking God seriously. The people in the book of Malachi were complaining that God wasn't coming through. He wasn't showing up. He wasn't working on their behalf. They could not find him. They could not locate him. They weren't seeing him moving. God tells them over and over again, if you can't find me, it's not because I've been relocated. If you can't find me, it's because you've drifted from underneath the covering, underneath the covenant. You have wandered from me while keeping your religious activity. He introduces us in chapter 4 to a phrase, for behold, the day is coming. For behold, the day is coming. In chapter 3, verse 17, he says, on the day. On the day. He says in verse 3 of chapter 4, soles of your feet on the day. He says in verse 5 of chapter 4 at the end, the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. The day, the day, the day, the day. Today I want us to take God's sovereignty seriously. The Supreme Court is that sovereign body that makes final ruling. When we talk about the word sovereignty, that's a theological term that simply means God rules, controls, and governs all things. Sovereignty. It speaks of the rulership of God governing all things. Or to put it another way, there is absolutely nothing that happens anywhere, anytime, anyhow, that is not either caused by God or allowed by God. He is sovereign over all. Now, what that means is that there is no such thing as luck. There is no such thing as chance. And there are no accidents. So stop buying your Lucky Charms. You say, but if God is sovereign and in control, how can things be so out of control? Because in God's sovereignty, He has allowed freedom. Freedom. Freedom is simply the divinely ordained capacity He's given men to make choices. He allows you to make choices that are consistent with Him. He will allow you to make choices that are in rebellion against Him. He will tell Adam, don't eat of the fruit, but He won't stop Adam from eating the fruit because He allows choices. Now, make no mistake, to allow a choice doesn't mean He gave up His freedom. Because He only allows choices to a point. Of course, you all know my favorite sport is football, and in football there are sidelines and goal lines, there are out of bound lines, and The game is sovereignly played within those lines. Those lines don't move. Those lines don't move. Those are fixed lines. But within those lines, you can call your own play. You can say whatever play you want to run. But the play must be run within those lines. There will be a whistle if you mess with the sovereignty of the line. You can call a bad play a good play. You can gain yardage, you can lose yardage, but there are boundaries beyond which you cannot go. What God has said is that God has a sovereign boundary beyond which he will not let man go. But he will let you make choices within the field of play, for good or for bad. History and humans are on a leash. You have a dog or have had a dog, and you take the dog for a walk and you put a leash on the dog. They have freedom to a point, depending on how much rope you've given them. Based on the amount of rope you've given them, they can go or run, but there comes a point where you go, because they've gone too far. They've gone beyond what the rope will allow. In other words, the rope allows freedom, but the rope also instills sovereignty because it can't go beyond what the leash will allow. History is on a leash, and so are you. God allows freedom for or against him, but he never gives up sovereignty. In other words, he never gives up being the Supreme Court, the final arbiter of how things will work out. But if men can do all of this, because in Malachi they were complaining that the wicked were ruling, the wicked were getting by, and that's a frustrating feeling. We've all had it, especially if you're trying to live for God, please God, serve God. You're giving to God, and the wicked who don't give a thing to God are making more than you, or you trying to be honest at work and the crooks at work are getting ahead. And he says at the end of verse 15 of chapter 3, he say the wicked get away, they escape. It doesn't look like God is in control. It doesn't look like God is sovereign. No, there is nothing that is either not caused or allowed by God. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now that's the second greatest truth you need to know. The second greatest truth you need to know for your life is that God is in control. That's the second greatest truth. I say it's the second because the first greatest truth you need to know is for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The first thing you got to do is respond to the gospel and become a Christian. But as a Christian, the second greatest truth, or the first greatest truth once you become a Christian, is that your God is sovereign, not your dice, not your rabbit foot hanging from your rear view mirror, not your cross around your neck. But God is sovereign. He makes the final decisions. God's sovereignty allows him fluidity. That is, he never limits himself to what you do. He gives you freedom to do it, but he will never let what you do be the final arbiter of what he does. That's why you never have to be intimidated by people. Because I don't care how big they are, they're not the Supreme Court. They're a lower court. And a lower court can be strong, it can be intimidating, it can feel like it's in charge, but it's not the Supreme Court. When it looks like evil men are blocking God, and that God can't get through, and the righteous are losing the battle, God never leaves himself with only one route. Because he's sovereign. That's why you can't get all shook up when the one way you thought it was going to work out didn't work out. Because that's not God's only way. That's not his only route. But where is he? I'm still stuck in this, whatever this is that I'm stuck in. Well, he talks about the day, the day, the day, the day. That's the day of his coming. What does that mean? When he refers to the day, he speaks both temporally and eschatologically. The day temporally refers to when he intervenes into history to reverse the way things look like they are headed. It's when he comes out of many times in the Bible you'll read the word suddenly or immediately. It means God just broke into history and turned something on a dime that looked like it was headed the wrong way. That is the day of his coming. The day when God shows up. The day when heaven intervenes. The day when you can't believe that happened. That way, that time. It is God's intrusion in history. The eschatological day, the day that 1 Thessalonians 5 talks about, the day of his coming, that's when Jesus Christ will penetrate history and bring history to its climax. That's the big day. When the day of the Lord comes, it has a twofold effect. He brings the wicked down and he raises the righteous up. When God shows up, the day of his coming, when God comes, there is a twofold effect. And that is, verse 18 of chapter 3 says, so you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve him. God creates a distinction and he makes it clear whose side he's on. The sovereignty of God says that God rules, God controls, he is doing things when you can't see it. On the day of his coming, you see it. You see what he's been working on in private, and then God goes public. Let me tell you how sovereign God is on the day of his coming. God is so sovereign that he will use the evil that's against him to get him the way he wants to go. That's how sovereign he is. He will use that which is not cooperating with him to cooperate with him to get him to where he chose to go. When Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, they were just moving him one step toward his destiny. When Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of rape, they were just moving him, when they put him in jail, one step closer to his destiny. When they forgot him in jail and it looks like God had left him alone, God was moving him one step closer to his destiny. So on the night that Pharaoh had the dream, it was simply time for his destiny. But God had some messed up brothers and a messed up family and a false rape charge and being forgotten in prison, get him to Egypt where he was going to birth a whole nation. See, God was doing something. You may have gotten fired from your job unjustly. It may not be fair what you're going through, but if you stick with God, he can take a mess and whip up a miracle.
Dr. Evans will be back in a moment with a great story about how God can do that, so stay with us. First, don't miss your last chance to get a copy of his current teaching series, Taking God Seriously as Our Gift. This brand new 10-message collection will teach you to make God's priorities your own by investing more energy and attention on your connection with the Lord as well as your bonds with your spouse and kids. When that happens, your faith will be refreshed and your connection with Christ restored. Until Monday, we're making this brand new collection available on CD as our way of saying thanks when you make any contribution, no matter the size, to help us keep Tony's teaching on this station. Just visit us today at tonyevans.org or call us day or night at 1-800-800-3222 and let one of our resource team members help you. That's 1-800-800-3222. Right now, Dr. Evans is back with more of today's lesson. Let's join him.
See, God has a blender. You don't eat a stick of butter by itself, but put it in the blender. You don't eat the flour of a cake mix by itself, but put it in the blender. You don't just pick up gobs of sugar by itself, but you put it in the blender. You put it in the blender, and then you let the blender work it. The blender is turning and twisting and mixing and matching, and it looks all confusing because by itself it didn't do anything, and now it's all mixed up and can't do it. Then you put it in the fire. That's what verse 1 says. You put it in the furnace, you put some heat on it, and all of a sudden something that didn't look like nothing is levitating you from the bedroom into the kitchen. God knows how to take the good, the bad, and the ugly, put it in his sovereign cosmic blender, and whip you up a smell, because he's sovereign. The day of his coming, the day of his intrusion, when he jacks up the wicked and levitates the righteous. That's what the author of Hebrews was saying when he says in Hebrews chapter 12 these words. He was talking to some discouraged people, tells them about the covenant that Jesus oversees in verse 24. And then he says, see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. Hebrews 12:25 says, verse 26, and his voice shook the earth then, and now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. Yet once more denotes the removing of the things which can be shaken as of created things, so that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. On the day of his coming, he's shaking something up. So if stuff is all shaky, it's a bad feeling, but it's good news. It don't feel good. It's like a woman in labor. It don't feel good, but something good coming down the pike. God, throughout the Bible, when he wanted to show himself and distinguish from the wicked and the righteous, who's right and who's wrong, precipitated a crisis. He let things get crazy. Because the sovereignty of God doesn't mean that things don't go wrong, that people can't make bad decisions. The man's name was Pharaoh. And Pharaoh raised the question, who is this God? I don't care about you, Moses, and I don't care about your God. Pharaoh is chasing Israel. Israel runs into a rock and a hard place. They're up a creek. They're on a limb. They're in a pinch. Because Pharaoh, evil is coming at them at one side, and the Red Sea is in front of them. You ever been in a place where there's nowhere to go? All your options have shut down on you. Watch this. When all your options shut down on you, it's because they're supposed to. When all your options, if you're doing what God says to do, talking about the righteous, you're seeking to please God. You may not be perfect, but your direction is to please God, and everywhere you turn is a block. It's because it's supposed to be a block. Because God is creating a crisis. Pharaoh one way, the Red Sea another way. And the people who did not understand the sovereignty of God said, Moses, why did you bring us out here to kill us? Better off that we would have been in Egypt than to be out here. Either Pharaoh's going to kill us or we're going to drown in this water. There is nowhere to go. God came down and said to Moses, he says, Moses, why are you standing down here whining? What the problem, Mo? Why are you standing there whining? Hold out that rod. He forgot his rod. That was the same rod that did the 10 miracles. But he forgot the rod. He said, hold out the rod. Don't stop whining and hold out the rod. He holds out the rod and the Red Sea opens up. Nothing will let you know how sovereign God is than when he puts you in a catch-22 and lets you see him open up a Red Sea. And the beautiful thing about it is, it says they crossed the Red Sea, get this, on dry land. Not mud, because if it was mud, they wouldn't have been able to roll the carts over it. So not only did God open up the water, he immediately dried the ground that had been underwater. See, it was more than one miracle. So that the carts and the animals could cross over without getting stuck in the mud. So if you're seeking to live for God and please God, he says you're going to see the sunrise. Healing, you're going to see his help, his restoration, his renewal, his involvement. Because he's sovereign. He has the final say-so. And the interesting thing about it is, God has the final say-so even when he uses things that appear insignificant. You wouldn't connect God's name to it. It doesn't seem like God is involved with it. And yet it turns everything around on a dime. Like Esther. The thing about Esther is God's name is nowhere found in the book. Yet, the book of Esther is critical because Haman is getting ready to kill all the Jews. He's getting ready to wipe out God's people. Mordecai's got this pretty niece, and the king likes her and takes her to be his wife. Girlfriend living large. Mordecai says, you need to go tell him who you are now, because maybe he'll save the people, and if he knows that he married a Jewish girl. She said, Mort, I'm going to pray for y'all because me and hubby ain't been talking for a month now, and if I go to him and he don't want to see me, I could be risking my life. Mordecai says to Esther, honey, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I like this because Mordecai believes in God's sovereignty, God will raise up somebody else. Because he ain't locked into you now. Don't think you all that and a bag of chips. Let's not overdo this, girl. You pretty and all that, but you ain't the only pretty sister up in here. God, because he makes the final decision, will raise somebody up. See, that's why you can't be all upset because the one person you were dependent on failed you. Because God knows how to find somebody else. He says, God will raise up a deliverance from another place. Because God's not dependent upon you. He's going to come into this thing. Even though we can't find his name in the book. You single ladies out there. All Ruth was doing was going to work. I mean, all she did, she was out there gleaning in the field. She was just doing her job. She wasn't going to bars looking to be picked up. She wasn't going to the club. She wasn't, she was just doing what she's supposed to be doing. And all of a sudden, Boaz is riding on his horse, and he looks out over the side and he says, oh my God. Boaz was a lot older, but he had some money. He said, who is that lady out there in the field? She wasn't looking for him. He wasn't looking for her. But they hooked up, got married. In her previous marriage, before she became a widow, she couldn't have children. She has a baby by Boaz, so he old but not cold. She has a baby by Boaz. His name is Obed. Obed has a baby. His name is Jesse. Jesse has a baby. His name is David. And David is the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. God is able to do some amazing things simply because he's sovereign. He says, if you stick with me, there will be healing, verse 2, in your wings. And you will go forth and you will skip about like calves from the stall. These are calves that have been cooped up. They've been in the stall. You feel like you locked up, locked down, you can't break out. He said, but when the coming of the day comes and the Supreme Court makes the decision, God opens up the stall and you go skipping. You've been cooped up. You've been trapped in this situation for an extended amount of time. But hold on, because he says the day of the Lord cometh. The day of his sovereign move. I know you feel like you're at a red light and it won't change. That you're at a stop sign. But like James told his people in James chapter 5, therefore be patient, brethren, in verse 7, until the coming of the Lord. Verse 8, you too be patient, strengthen yourself, for the coming of the Lord is near. Where God is going to intervene in history, your history, and ultimately eternal history.
So what do we do in the meantime? Dr. Evans will be back with the answer in just a moment. In the meantime, if you'd like to get a full-length copy of today's lesson, just search for the title, Taking Sovereignty Seriously, when you visit TonyEvans.org. But don't forget, if you contact us by Monday, we'll send you all 10 messages in Tony's current series, Taking God Seriously, as our thank you gift when you support the alternative with a contribution of any amount. There's no more time to wait, so get details right away at TonyEvans.org, where you can also find a huge collection of life-changing resources and sign up for Tony's free weekly email devotional. Again, that's TonyEvans.org. You can also call our resource center at 1-800-800-3222. Team members are standing by day and night to help you. 1-800-800-3222. Next week, Tony will launch into a series that focuses on the particular blessings in store for us when we take God seriously, starting with one of the most important, spiritual insight. You won't want to miss it. Right now, he's back with this final story for us.
So what do you need to do? Well, he tells you. In verse 4, he says, remember. Remember. Remember the law of Moses, my servant. That's the word of God. Remember my word. He says, if you look over my history, remember. In other words, you still operate by my guidelines. Even though it doesn't look good, you're a calf in the stall, it's not working out, it looks like God is silent and God is still. He says, you remember. You remember, you hang in there. You don't give up, even though giving up is what you want to do, because God is in charge. And when I break through, I'm going to divide the wicked from the righteous.
The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans is brought to you by the Urban Alternative and is made possible by the generous contributions of listeners like you.